Hello, my name is Rich Howard, owner of Architectural Builder Supply, and this video is to bring you a closer look at the Rixson number 128-3/4 pivot set. This is a center hung pivot and is Rixson's entry-level sort of pivot hardware. Very typical, very common pivot hardware that is used for center hung applications, specifically for doors rated up to 250 pounds. And in the world of center hung standard duty pivots, this is Rixson's, shield and sword. It's everything. This is probably the most common pivot that I've ever sold. So it's very typical, it's very common, it's very easy to install. If it's your 50th time doing it, it's easy to install. So let's just start at the beginning. There is a link below this video to a technical drawing, which also acts as of a lot of information, a lot of instruction related items, and then something they actually call instructions, which I've actually never seen before. In all of my years, it had always been just this. And you didn't really need any more, but it was a lot to digest. So their 128-3/4 is a center hung pivot. Center hung means that the door, got the width and the height of the door, the axis of pivoting is down in the center of the door in terms of thickness. And that dimension is determined in the center of the door, but then you refer to your paperwork in terms of what that axis of pivoting actually is. And we'll get to that in a moment after we begin to interpret the technical drawing. Center hung hardware is used very commonly because people want to enjoy a concealed aspect to their door hardware. Concealed pivot is something that you never really see whatsoever when the door is closed, and even when it's open, unless you're looking for it, you really don't see much of it at all. Let's take a tour of all the parts that are included. From the bottom up, well, technically from the bottom up, you're going to get a screw package, and that's going to do really everything. But starting at the bottom, you're going to get those screws to hold your floor plate on, and this is wrapped up in plastic. I don't want to pull it off because it's going to a client. In a 625 polished chrome finish is what this is. And this is a standard floor plate with a stud here, and that stud is specifically for the bottom spindle, arm, that gets mortised to the bottom of the door, and it looks just like that when it's installed. Bearing packet inside of here, and again rated for 250 pounds. Okay. And by the way, with center hung pivots, there is no concept of intermediate pivots with a center hung. And actually, let's detour there. If you're hanging wood doors, you're going to want to know up front that a center hung pivot is, I think as far as a wood door manufacturer is concerned, not a proper way to hang a door, meaning that the door could naturally develop or have some warp to it. It's a wood door. The wood doors, in my experience, 1 out of 10 seems to have some warp to it. If you have warp and it's a problem on your wood door and you've used just center hung pivots, you may not have recourse against the door supplier or door manufacturer for that condition of warp, because their specifications say that there must be a hinge or a pivot every so many inches throughout the door. So people who are concerned about warp or excessive weight would certainly go with not excessive weight. If you're concerned about warp, or it's an application that requires there to be intermediate pivots, you would be talking about an offset pivot at that point. So keep in mind that if you have a wood door situation, you might find that a claim for warp would be dismissed out of hand if you're using center hung pivots. A word for the wise: check your warranty and just ask the question clearly before you proceed. Now, moving up the door, you're going to get to a portion that is attached or mortised to the top of the door, and it's right there. Up in the header, you're going to get this assembly, and this pin is connected to this ball screw, and as you turn that, you can see that it draws that pin in, and now you get the idea of how you go about installing that. I had a screwdriver, I could keep drawing it up, which I don't. Anyway, you draw that up so that it's flush, and then at that point you can take your door with your spindles attached, or your arms attached to the top and bottom of the door, get it to rest on your bottom plate stud, and then you can take the door and tip it in, and as the door is ajar, you'll be able to turn that clockwise, drive your top pin down into the top portion of the door, allowing you to complete your installation. After that, the only thing you have left is the decorative finish plate that you would need for this. You can see all those appropriate holes there match up with what you'd be dealing with. Okay. Now, going over the installation, I'm going to review this now. It refers to their 127 3/4 and 128 3/4. The only difference is, as you can see in the lower left-hand column, the 127 features an L angle that you would mortise to the frame. So that's the only difference. Locate the pivot. Step A, measure 1 and 15/16 out from door jamb on center line of the door. This is the location of the spindle center. So you can see from the drawing here that axis of pivoting in the center of the door, you can see how that's referenced. That's the center line. And then you go inch and 15/16 after that. And now you've got a dimension this way and a dimension that way. That is your axis of pivoting. That is the most critical thing, to make sure that that line is plumb. Okay. Step B, and this sometimes is the challenging part. Round heel edge and prepared door for 1/16 minimum clearance through the entire opening. So what is necessary in this installation, if you're following the template, is that you need to radius, or at least bullnose, the door. If you radius as it's shown, that door will be able to double act. And I don't think that the drawing might be slightly out of scale, but nonetheless, you need to accomplish a condition of a radius on the edge of the door in order to maintain, or to achieve, a very tight margin between the edge of the door and the jamb. Otherwise, your problem is this: you've got a square edge door, and my palm is the cased opening frame, and that rotates through there, and it hits, is the bottom line. Although it doesn't, well, if it's the lock side of the door, it would hit like this, but when you round all this over, you can achieve a real tight margin, a 1/16 of an inch minimum, so you can get it real tight, and the door will still clear. If you're going to force the door to be single acting, then you only have to do one side, the pull side, in order to do that bullnose or round over effect. But you'll need to do it, and you'll need to have the tools to go about doing it, or order the doors appropriately. The way that I've always done it, in a somewhat production sort of setting, if you do them routinely, you'll just have the tools, over time set up with the fixture ready to go, so you don't have to do a tool change. And really, the way that I went about doing it is I'd have a giant roundover bit, so that I could put that into a large horsepower router, like a 2-horse router. Take the base of the router and cut a hole in the bottom of it so that your very large router bit can fit into there, and you set the depth based on the door thickness. Let's assume 1 3/4, and you get your door laid down on your work table, sawhorses, however you're doing it. Make sure it doesn't move, clamp it down. You take that router and you start at the on the right side, and you just go to the left, and you round over that entire edge of the door. You make a very clean pass, because you're only going to have one more pass. You're only going to do 2. Anything beyond that, and the quality of the job won't be good. You've got to get it. Don't tip it. Don't push it off the top, or more importantly, when you get to the end of the door, you want to take that, let the base do its job, keep it flat on the base, and just go right across and let it exit straight off. And then you'll make one more cleaning pass, and then if you do that enough times, you'll get great at it, and then your doors will look perfect. Obviously, if you're a full-blown wood door manufacturer, you probably have CNC tooling for doing it, etc., etc. One downside of taking a veneered door is that as you radius the edge of the door over, you will be accentuating or drawing attention to the different layers of what makes up the veneer in a veneer door. There could be 3 layers of the veneer, the backing, the cross banding, and you'll see all those layers. Example is on a job, cherry doors, American black cherry doors, where the veneer, just in its natural state, is closer to brown than blonde, actually. But when you take that router and you do that preparation to it, you'll see the different colors of the different layers of the banding, the cross banding, and the veneer backer. So keep that in mind if you're doing a job that in 1,000 doors, that was a legitimate complaint on one door, on one job. It wasn't black cherry, it was walnut, actually. So there was a tremendous dark, light, medium color to what was seen there. So keep that in mind when you go about rounding over your doors. If you have any questions on how to go about rounding over your doors, feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to expand on it further if you'd like. Step 2 is to install the pivot set. Care must be exercised to see that the bottom pivot is level. And it absolutely must be level in both directions. You can see from the drawing here, this little guy is meant to be a level. And what they're saying is the unit needs to be level this way, plumb, and level this way. It's got to be perfectly level. Otherwise, the door will not behave properly. You'll be able to tell when it's center hung. Locate the floor portion. Anchor the portion securely to the door. Your bottom arm gets secured to the bottom of the door. This is already secured. I think what you're going to have your carpenters, your journeyman guys who've done this, they're going to draw off that inch and 5/16. They're going to run a plumb bob. They're going to mark the location for this, and then they're going to be in good shape. They'll get their arms attached top and bottom of the door. You'll go about mortising this in the header. Let's back up. Install the door portion of the pivot per template. Center line of pivot should align with center line of bottom spindle. Absolutely it should. So this and this need to be plumb. Use plumb line to assure accuracy. There you go. Mortise bottom of the door to receive the arm. That we already got installed. Hang the door. We go back to what I said earlier about drawing this pin up and down. Draw it in, tip it in, clockwise, drops the pin down, you're good to go. Remove the door if you have to, if you need to finish it, if there's painting that has to occur, whatever the case might be. Now, all of the dimensions that you're going to need for the install it, mortise it part that I said, that's all on this page. And you know, this technical drawing really looks like a mess, but the truth of the matter is it's not. You just take one little section at a time. I have looked at this template and Rixson's templates for years, and I don't believe I have ever found a single discrepancy in any of it. Every single time that I couldn't find something right away, I looked at it another 5 seconds, and sure enough I found it. It's all there. The part where I think I can contribute to your experience, if this is your first time, is the notes section in the upper right hand corner. Do not scale the drawing. That's right. Right hand shown. That's typical and common. You need to know that. It is the door and frame manufacturer's responsibility to check the hardware schedule and prepare the doors and frames. Okay. Pivots drilled for 1/4-20 bolt screws. Okay. Suitable reinforcing by others. Now that's an interesting point. Suitable reinforcing by others. Generally, you won't have a problem at all with a door being suitable, a wood door, architectural grade wood door. I have had people wonder why they couldn't just get all this attached to a drywall cased opening with nothing inside of that drywall except a layer of 5/8 drywall. I've had that conversation more than once. You need to have a wood header is the bottom line. This needs to be mortised to a substantial piece of proper framing at the top, not drywall. Very important. Doors, step 6, note 6, doors must be radiused. Radius is determined by pivot point to the frame, less a 1/16 of an inch. The 128 pivot point can be moved towards the lock edge. Okay. So your pivot point for this is, pivot point is 1 5/16. We determined that earlier. So the radius of your round over bit needs to be 1 1/4 inches. So if you're buying a round over bit, that's a 2.5 inch round over. So you can just think in your head, that's a huge bit. That's what it takes. Keep in mind that door thickness is important. You don't want the radius cannot exceed your door thickness, because otherwise your radius won't be aggressive enough for the door to properly clear. Note number 7, and that pertains to really the part that you need to know by looking at the template, is how deep you mortise this into the bottom of the door. Now, the arm up at the top, you just make that flush. That's what you do there. But the arm at the bottom, you have to see note 7. Note 7 says 5/16 minimum, 3/4 inch maximum clearance. If more clearance is required, you need a longer spindle, and that would be a reference to the length of the spindle on this. And those are available. Reach out to us if you want to discuss that. So what you're seeing there at the note 7, that you will achieve an undercut and this is one of those instances where you have to look at it longer. Okay, here we go. Okay, so you've got, if you're looking at the template, you can see that there's a 1 inch dimension, and that would be from the top of the mortise in the door to the floor. And you know that the thickness of this is 1/4 inch. Okay, and thereby you can determine what the dimension is going to be from the floor to the inside of the plate. Now, what that's going to give you is the amount of depth to your mortise. So looking at the example that they have here, you can see that you have a 1 inch dimension from the floor to the top of this mortise. If you're going to achieve, and you know that you've got a 1/4 inch here, if you're going for a 3/4 inch undercut, you know that this has to be mortised flush. Okay? If you're going to go for a 1/2 inch undercut, and you're sticking with your 1 inch dimension there, and you know you got a 1/4 inch for this, you know that you have to make your mortise depth a 1/2 inch. 1 inch is the fixed dimension. Your undercut's the next fixed dimension. This is a 1/4 inch, and then you add the difference between the two. So 1 inch minus a 1/2 inch undercut, a 1/4 inch for this, you've got a 1/4 inch there to play with, so your mortise depth is a 1/2 inch. This will not be flush with the bottom of the door in that instance. That's how you determine the depth of your mortise. Everything else is straightforward. Once you know this dimension, your pivot center line, okay, you know the undercut from the door for your bottom arm, you're in real good shape. Rixson is a leader in the world of pivots. They are the name synonymous with pivots, with floor closers, with overhead stops, with a variety of other specialty items like electromagnetic door holders, thresholds for floor closers. If you have any questions on the Rixson number 128-3/4 pivot set or any other Rixson product, please feel free to reach out to us. Thank you.